Have you ever dreamed about living in the #1 summer vacation spot in Washington state? I'm talking about living in Lake Chelan. It might be more achievable than you think, and today we're talking about the cost of living in Chelan. I bet you're going to be surprised by some of the things we found. We're going to compare the cost of living of Lake Chelan next to the national average cost and Washington state's average cost. Let's start out with talking about the grocery category. Chelan offers a few different grocery options. There is a Safeway, a Walmart, and 2 locally owned markets. There is the Bare Foods Natural Market and the Chelan Fresh Market. Unlike most areas in the state, Chelan's grocery is close to the national average at only being 0.04% higher than the national average food cost. This is really impressive because usually in rural areas, especially when you get off of main interstates, the average for grocery costs is about 5% higher than the national average. Washington state is typically about 1% higher than the national average for groceries. Okay, next let's talk about healthcare. The Chelan area doesn't have a lot of healthcare options, but they do have a hospital in town, and it does pretty well considering the amount of resources that it has available. The local hospital and medical facilities are pretty well equipped to handle most medical needs for the local residents. But if you need anything specialized, you're going to be traveling to the Wenatchee area, and that's a 45-minute drive. We're not going to consider that transportation cost in part of the healthcare cost. We'll talk about transportation in a little bit. The healthcare cost is ranked 6% lower than the national average, but 5% higher than Washington state's average. Next on the list is housing, and this is where Chelan gets a really bad reputation for cost of living. The average home price in Chelan is right around $1 million, so depending on your situation and where you're coming from, this is going to feel a little bit different for everybody. The Chelan housing cost is 72% higher than the national average and about $200,000 higher than the Washington state average. Let's take a look at what your money can buy in Chelan. The good news about owning real estate in Chelan is that your property tax rate is 0.88% of the assessed value of your home, which is lower than the national average of 0.94% and much lower than Seattle's rate at 1.05%. If you're coming from somewhere like Texas, this is going to feel really refreshing. The next category Chelan gets a big gold star for, and that's utilities. Chelan's utility rate is 65% lower than the national average and 11% lower than Washington state's average. A lot of this has to do with the hydro dams on the Columbia River. The Chelan-Douglas County PUD offers the lowest rates for utility in the country. A lot of homes in Chelan are also on well and septic, so that cuts that cost out as well. This report that I'm looking at is showing that transportation costs in the area is 17% lower than the national average, and I just don't believe that. Washington is renowned for its high gas prices. As this is being recorded, the national average gas price is $3.66 per gallon. Washington state's average is $4.65 per gallon. And once again, typically when you get into these more rural areas and off these main highways, gas prices are even higher. The Texaco and Chelan's gas price right now is at $4.79 per gallon. Although there is a lot less traffic in the Chelan area, you will actually be spending more time in your car. Everything is fairly spread out, and you're going to find yourself going to the Wenatchee area quite frequently for shopping trips. This is about a 45-minute car ride one way. You'll be burning a lot more gas when you're living in Chelan. Our next item is miscellaneous things such as going out to eat, shopping, clothing. The good news is this is a very controllable category on how much you're spending. The bad news is Chelan rates 15 points higher than the national average and 2.5 points higher than the state's average. You're going to find these same kind of numbers when you live in any sort of vacation town around the country. The one big reason that the cost is more is not because these businesses want to gouge you, but it's because they have to make their money during the tourist season. The off seasons can really be a big drain on their bank account, and this kind of business structure is what they need to do to float them throughout the year. So what does this mean for you? Well, if you're planning to go out and eat, plan on spending about $18 for a hamburger and $50 for a steak, which really isn't bad when you start to compare it to the Seattle metro prices. Clothing stores are all boutiques, so the prices are going to be reflected in that. For your basic clothing needs, you're most likely going to be doing your shopping online. Event pricing is really going to vary in Chelan. You can find a lot of community events and fundraisers that don't have any admission costs, but then there's big balls and events and festivals that can cost $100 or more per person for a ticket. If you're thinking about retiring in Chelan, I have some good news for you. The Washington state income tax is in your favor. Washington state is one of the 9 states that don't have an income tax. This means that you get to keep more of your hard-earned dough. Chelan has become a very popular landing spot for many people retiring from the Seattle area. I'm Amanda Dallman, your Central Washington Realtor. Get a hold of us if you're thinking about moving to the area. Our information is in the description below.